Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. On today's show, we have a special guest. He goes by the name of Damon Burton, but I call him the SEO Beastmaster. And once he starts talking and tells you who he is and what he does, it'll make perfect sense why I call him that. So, Damon, the floor is yours, man. Give an introduction to who you are.
Thanks for having me, Chantel. Damon Burton. I've been doing SEO for 14 years. I started a company called SEO National. We've worked literally all across the board. I can tell you some funny stories in a minute, but worked on the high end with like NBA teams, worked with multi-billion-dollar international real estate companies, and then on the other side of the spectrum, we still got our first dozen mom and pop clients from 14 years ago. 14 years ago, still with us. Married for 14 years as well, and got 3 kids. And I have a beard.
And the beard is part of your branding as well, right?
It's like taking on a life of its own for sure. So, if the listeners that can't catch this on video, behind me in my backdrop is a logo of my face with the beard. And it just, like, one day I just grew the beard out. Like, I had the beard, but I looked very like Amish because I didn't have the mustache thing going on. And then one day I grew the mustache in. I don't know if I was lazy or what, and then I was on a podcast, and this was like probably 2 years ago. And the person said something about my beard looking good. And I'm like, that was weird. And then I posted a picture on Facebook or something a couple days later. And then I just kept getting people commenting on my beard. So I'm like, let's just see where this goes. And it just took on a life of its own.
And then from that, you get brand equity.
Yeah. So I ran with it.
So, I mean, just tell us a little bit about your business. I mean, just start with like the bare basics. I mean, how did you even get into SEO?
Yeah, so those that aren't familiar with SEO, it stands for search engine optimization. The abbreviated answer of what that is your goal is to have your website show up higher on search engines for words that you can monetize, but without paying for ads. So I got into it. My background was originally design. So me and my team, we still do a lot of design. We just do way more SEO. And what happened was, I mean, how far back do you want me to take this?
Take it back to the roots, man.
So, when I was in high school, 20-something years ago, they didn't have WordPress, they didn't have Dreamweaver, and they didn't have Shopify and these builder programs. And so I had to learn HTML by hand. But I tell you what, now that's like the best thing ever, because when you use those programs, they don't know if the thing looks ugly. They just do whatever you tell it to do. So it's nice to go in there and manually override things. So I kind of picked up a little bit of HTML back then. And then when I went to college, there was a communications class, and they said, hey, we're going to learn some HTML as well. And so I said, sweet, I know a little bit. And what happened was the teacher says, all right, we're going to build a website, and it has to have A, B, and C, this criteria. And I got thinking, I'm going to spend a lot of freaking time on this project. And then at the end of the semester, they're just going to delete it off the school servers. So I thought, why don't I ask if I can buy a domain and keep it? And so I built up this car enthusiast website because, of course, I'm a young 20-something male. So, of course, I'm into cars. And so I built like this car hobby site where I'd showcase local cars that I would see. I'd be driving down, Main Street or whatever, and I'd see somebody else's nice car, and I'd like wave them down. And surprisingly, the majority of people would pull over. And I'd keep these little sheets in my car, and I'd say, hey, I feature cars. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Can I take a couple pictures? And so I built like this little profile website for cars, and I ended up noticing that it was getting traffic. So then I said, okay, well, how do I make this better? And that's when I got more into design. And then after it continued to grow, I said, how do I monetize this? And that's when I got into marketing. And then I was the guy that did web designs on the side, that I'm sure a lot of people know somebody or do that themselves. And then the point where I went all in was my day job was contributing about half my income, but it was taking up 80% of my time. And my side hustle was taking up 20% of my time, but providing 40-50% of my income. And so when I got to the point where I could cut off the day job, which would suck, losing half your income, but still pay my bills and free up that time, that seemed like a pretty good calculated risk. And so that's when I made the jump, and freeing up that time, made that income back in 2 or 3 months. And the rest is history. I guess here we are 14 years later, got a team of 20 and worked with some of those clients that I touched on earlier.
Nice, nice, nice. So I mean, back to the whole SEO Beastmaster thing, and the reason why I deemed him this is we kind of found each other through Facebook, kind of became like Facebook friends. So by default through Facebook, through the algorithm, things kind of pop up based upon what you like to see. So
Mm-hmm.
every time I would log into Facebook, like your stuff started popping up, and I was like, cool. And then I kept on, you like this and you like that, and then more information started popping up, and then
Yeah.
I think your comedic side started kicking in, right? You started doing like
Yeah.
the double heads, the triple heads, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
started playing with the
Yeah.
cartoon stuff. So I mean, kind of like dive into that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
most people think that when you're talking about SEO, it's just keywords, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
realize there's a lot of creative that goes into those keywords and finding the trend. So why don't you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we can talk about some of the fun stuff and then some of the boring stuff. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way. So there's SEO is obviously there's a lot of moving parts, but if you really condense it down, it's kind of what you touched on. It's basically two categories. First category is what you do on your website. Second category is what you do externally to your website. So the stuff you do on your website in the first category is good content, good user experience. Does the website load quickly? Is it mobile friendly? Now, if you want to go like even deeper on that, you talk about keywords. Yeah, usually the stereotype that comes to mind when people talk about keywords is just like stuffing keywords, and also stuffing keywords into a little snippet that used to be called meta keywords. And what's interesting is if you ever have an SEO guy say we need to optimize your meta keywords, just run, because Google is on record as far back as 2009, over a decade ago, saying we don't even look at those anymore. So it's not what you think anymore. It's largely about building credibility. And so the short version of how you do that is you tackle category number one, which is make sure the website loads quickly, is good user experience, has good design. But then most of the gains actually comes from the ongoing process, which is the external credibility. Do other websites talk about you and link to you? And that comes through good content, good user experience, because as long as you solve problems and answer questions and provide a good product, then people are going to share your link and talk about your website. And maybe the last thing I'll talk about on this topic is, you mentioned like keywords, and so you have to really put in a lot of effort to figure out what you're going to write about. So even before you write, you have to go do competitive analysis and keyword research, and you have to really align what you offer with your buyer's intent, instead of just, I'm going to talk about this thing because this thing is in my industry. Like, who cares? So you really have to, there's tools, and depending on where this conversation goes, I can give the listener some free tools, but you have to really figure out what is your audience, like what the hell do they want to know? Like, they don't want to, they may want to buy your thing, but they don't want to be sold. They want to come to the conclusion on their own that will solve my problems. So how do you present creative, entertaining, problem solving content to get them in the door? Then they see your thing, then they buy because they trust you. So that's the boring thing. The fun, you're talking about humor. Yeah. So SEO sounds really techy, and to an extent it is. And I wrote a book earlier this year, and it was like the same thing. I was like, how do I write a book without boring the shit out of people on SEO? And so I started the book with stories about fun things that have happened throughout my career with SEO, but throughout it, they underscore and emphasize the power in it. And so that's what I try to do on social media, is not come in there with the 1, 2, 3 steps and the boring things like you need to audit your website and so I try to come in and be like, hey, here's this cool thing that we accomplished, and here's how, and share it in, like you said, a storied way. Or I try to show some personality, because another thing, depending on where this conversation goes, is I get a lot of success and traction through social proof and just giving away free answers and being personable and building trust with an audience. And so that's what I try to do, is just be like, hey, here's this cool thing, and here's a funny double-headed picture, me half man, half woman, or whatever it is,
hugging yourself, right?
Or hugging 2 Damons, yeah.
It's hilarious, Harris. I mean, a good segue. You brought up your book, got it in hand right here, right?
There you go. Yeah.
So I think one of my, like, the solid chapters, I think, is chapter 6, the content, how much and how often. And just looking through that content, I mean, you pretty much have an entire year's worth of guidance on step by step, not necessarily a hand holder, but here's a topic and here's a reason why to discuss it. So just dive into that a little bit. Like, how did you come up with these 12 months worth of content?
Yeah. So what essay's talking about is, there's, writing sucks. Like, for 90% of us out there, writing sucks. But at the same time, we know we need to do it. And so years ago, I would say out of the 14 years of running the company, I'd say maybe like, 10 years ago, we were the budget provider. And because what we would do is we'd say, okay, we bring a certain value for a certain price point, but I've always been very morally driven. So obviously, yeah, that'd be awesome to make more money. But at the time, I didn't feel like I brought enough value to justify having higher prices. And so in that, time frame, what we would do is, since we didn't at the time, we didn't have in-house copywriters. And so we would talk to the customer and say, hey, content's really important. Here's kind of like a game plan. You're the expert in whatever you sell, like go write the content. And it would just never happen, which is understandable because business owners are running businesses. And so then we said, all right, well, we'll write it, but you tell us what to write about. Same problem. It just never happened. So then when the first instance of that content outline that you're talking about was born 8-10 years ago. And it freaking sucked, man, to come up with that, because what we had to do is we had to say, okay, we can't proactively come up with content for every client right now, because every client's going to be in a different industry with different audiences. But can we come up with like a general outline to help us get a head start? And so what we did is we mapped out like a 52-week content calendar, like this 12-month kind of thing that had reoccurring events. And the keyword is reoccurring, because I didn't want to have the team map out all these ideas and then throw it away at the end of the year. And so what the plan and what the outline in the book that you're talking about is a general outline. It's not going to be for everybody. There's not going to be a topic for everybody. There's not going to be a topic for every month, but it should be able to give you, like, it should give you that light bulb where you go, oh, okay, I get it. So here's a good, process, a mental approach to coming up with content that not only will attract the right audience, but solve their problems, but I can come up with content in a creative way. So that chapter has two things. One is a very literal outline that can kind of give you a head start. But then more importantly is, the thought process. Like, how do you come up with a better, more relevant outline on your own?
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, since we're on the topic of the book, right? I mean, obviously, to your point, writing a book, if anybody doesn't know, it sucks unless you love writing, right? So, big time. So, I mean, how did you come up with the title? It looks like, you did a 2-part thing. Well, the title is Outranked, and then obviously some keywords driven. So, I mean, how did you come up with the title for the book?
The title took a while. I sat on it for a while. I had a couple ideas, and I'd see which one would resonate. So it's tricky to find a balance between what do you think you should put versus for stereotypical reasons, what would perform better, what would whatever, versus like passionately what you want to put. So I just kind of sat on it for a while, and then the subtitle, I wanted to kind of clearly communicate what they could get out of the book. And the book cover is really simplistic. It's clean, white space, and it's not like one of those pukey kind of things. So in all things, I'm more leaning towards simplicity as we grow and as I grow personally. And so I just kind of sat on it until I could find the right balance of what was me and what the book offered in a simplistic way.
Nice. So, now that you have the book, right, you have an agency, and that agency, it looks like you have twofold. You're a consultant and you're doing some design work. What's like the biggest hurdle you had to overcome to get to where you are currently?
Documenting processes is always the one that stands out because of how long it took. I've always been aware of the importance of documenting processes, but here's the problem that I had. So when I was in, my company, I started from the ground up, never taken on funding. It was slowly add another person. Like, I would stretch myself and the team to as far as we could before we had to grow out of necessity. And so it was a slow progression, but it worked awesome for me because I think throughout those years, you learn certain things that you like and don't like and how to approach business. And I was able to fine tune the business and how it would grow in a way that I wanted it to grow. So, the part about scaling and documenting processes was when we were going through some of those growing pain eras. It was probably about year 4 in the agency. I had processes on, some on a spreadsheet and some in my head and some wherever else. And I had a couple things happen, like all within a short time frame, that really underscored the importance of documenting processes. So what those things was I had a venture capital company come to me and say, hey, we're buying your friend's company. So my friend kind of made the intro, and he said, we're buying your friend's company. They're a marketing agency, but they don't do SEO. It'd be really attractive if we could kind of lump you guys together. And then now we got what he does, and then SEO as well. So I ended up declining. I went to a meeting, but declined the negotiations because it just didn't feel right. But when we were in there, I learned that if you ever exit your company, the buyer wants to know where the fire is, so they can pour more fuel on it. So your sales, how do they just throw more money at sales? And then they want to take the keys and run. So that was the first thing. You have to have turnkey processes. But while that happened, within a couple of weeks, I was also listening to 2 audiobooks. One was 4-Hour Workweek and one was E-Myth Revisited. So a lot of people will be familiar with 4-Hour Workweek. Now, I didn't take away like a ton of, my head didn't explode reading the book because a lot of stuff I was familiar with. But the main thing I took away was, why don't I scale? Why don't I have more people? And so at the time I had maybe 2 VAs, and then within, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, I had like 5 or 6 team members. And so I doubled, tripled, and just started adding more and more and more people. But I couldn't do that until what is presented in the other book, E-Myth Revisited. So E-Myth Revisited is about make your company dependent on processes and not people. And so then the combination of the venture capital thing and E-Myth Revisited, I had to tackle that to get to the scaling with 4-Hour Workweek. And so at that point, I started documenting processes. And when I documented, it was like an hour or 2 every other day for about a year. It was a long freaking time. And the reason why it took so long is because other than having to make slight adjustments as time went on, I never wanted to do it again. I wanted to just knock it out of the park, make sure as long as I had an employee that could read and follow directions, like they couldn't screw it up. And so I went through and recreated and manually, personally did every single conceivable task that I could think of that our company could ever do. And so I documented how to audit a website. I documented how to launch a new design. Like I documented customer touch points on day 1, welcome them and send them an email that says this. And on week 2, have another team member send them an email that says this. Absolutely everything is just perfectly streamlined now. And so now it's awesome because I can just go in and push a button and kick out 200 tasks to 20 different team members in 50 seconds, and guaranteed quality control, good user engagement. And so it sucked in that moment, but I knew it would be worth it.